This week on Cosmic Sponge, Stephen is called away to lend his expertise at an archaeological site. Possible intelligence failure off the coast of California may be aliens. Lockheed test crew witness a UFO over Santa Cruz. Poland discovers a new cryptid in a tree, and we get into the weeds with the first modern UFO sighting by Kenneth Arnold. Stick around as Jim barely holds it together, flying solo. They have a picture. Okay, folks, I gotta leave this one behind. I'm not gonna be able to hold it together for the next segment.
Flash! We interrupt this program to bring you breaking news from the Giza Plateau. Egyptologists have discovered a deep shaft beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza. Cameras lowered down the newly discovered passage revealed a tomb and what appears to be the mummified remains of a lizard man. Upon closer inspection, archaeologists also identified what can only be described as a perfectly preserved pastry, firmly clutched in the scaly-clawed hand of what many are calling the Solarian King. Pastry expert Stephen Hawke of Cosmic Sponge fame was called in to confirm the precise subgenus of the moist, cylindrical-shaped object. When asked about the extraordinary find, all he had to say was, quote, "Daddy's gonna eat the lizard man's Twinkie." Now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the podcast where we talk about UFOs and other weird wonders in the world. I'm Jimmy Coe, and today we are sans Stephen Hawke. He isn't with us today, but he did leave an envelope here. So let's open this up and see what he has to say here. Okay. Got called away to Egypt. Stop. It's like a telegram, I guess. Called away to Egypt. Stop. Holy Grail of Twinkies. Stop. We'll be back next week. Stop. Check out news item below. Stop. All right. And he's got a link here to a news item. And then he also he asked me here to do the intro stuff. Okay, I did the intro. Okay, let's see here. Stephen has a reminder about the contest. Yeah, let's do that. Maestro, drum roll, please. And the winner of the Cosmic Sponge Winter Contest is Stephen B696. Our first runner-up is Burke's Dragon, and our second runner-up is Thomas KB. We will be contacting each of you today so we can get those prizes out to you ASAP. We'd like to thank everyone who entered, and if you were not a winner, don't worry, because we're going to be providing more opportunities to win some UFO, cryptid, and other Cosmic Sponge goodies throughout 2022. All right, guys, let's see what else we got here. And he asked me to do all this stuff, where we talk about checking out our website at www.cosmicsponge.com. Let's see, you want to donate? There's a little teacup thing at the top right. What else we got here? Rate and review wherever you listen to us. Instagram, Facebook, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, you guys all know that stuff. We'll leave that to him when he gets back. Let's jump on to the news because I have a good news article, and we'll see what Stevens is here that he left us. The first one we have is an opinion piece out of thehill.com. This looks pretty cool. The Navy has a perplexing mystery on its hand. That's how it starts out. In 2019, unknown objects stalked U.S. warships off the coast of Southern California. While the bizarre drone-like encounters remain unsolved, the incidents occurred in an area with a long history of UFO sightings. According to the documents that they reviewed, the Navy, working with the FBI and Coast Guard, now appears to have ruled out civilian activity or U.S. military operations as plausible explanations for the encounters. So this just leaves us with two possibilities, right? Either a foreign adversary is spying on Navy ships around the Channel Islands. And the Channel Islands, if you look at a map, it's off the coast of California to the west of like Los Angeles, San Diego area. Or these are devices of truly unknown origin and are operating with impunity around the U.S. vessels. The implications of if it's a foreign power deploying drones to spy on us, well, That's a huge, huge intelligence failure on our part. The Navy reportedly attempted to shoot down one of these drones that they saw in the airspace over them. They weren't successful, it doesn't look like, but if they were, shooting down a foreign surveillance drone so close to U.S. shores would invite sweeping geopolitical repercussions. On the other hand, if these things are of some unknown origins, that's still an intelligence failure because we don't know what these things are. This goes back to several incidents in that area that we need to talk about, just briefly. Now, one is the USS Nimitz encounter, a very similar thing where we had some unknown things coming down from San Clemente and heading south over this operations area where we had the USS Nimitz. Now, we did an entire episode on that, and we don't have to revisit that particular episode. But another episode that's worth mentioning is one where contributions from American Aviation Clarence Kelly Johnson. He was the first head of Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works. He was responsible for the U-2 spy plane and the SR-71. While out with his wife on December 16th of 1953, Johnson and his wife watched as a UFO with no apparent control surfaces or engines hovered over them for several minutes in the vicinity of Santa Cruz Island, and then accelerated rapidly out of sight. Unknown to Johnson, a Lockheed flight test crew in the vicinity, which included the company's chief aerodynamics engineer, chief flight test engineer, and two highly experienced test pilots, observed this same object while they were flying northwest along the Los Angeles coastline. Unsurprisingly, Johnson and the flight crew's description of the incident are meticulously detailed. Most importantly, Lockheed's engineers and pilots explicitly ruled out cloud formation as a plausible explanation for that incident. Nonetheless, the Air Force, freshly charged with discrediting or debunking all UFO sightings, including 5 of America's most credible observers, they claimed they were fooled by a small cloud. Now, this is absurd. I think any reasonable person would hear this and say, come on, if you're gonna be a skeptic about something, come up with something better than what all of these experts saw was nothing more than a small cloud. Come on. At least pull temperature aversion out. Or maybe a weather balloon. I don't know. Anyway, you can find that on thehill.com, and I'll post this over on our Facebook page. Now let's see what kind of amazing thing Steve has for us today. Oh my God. Okay, here we go, folks. Mysterious, menacing beast sighted lurking in a tree in Poland is later identified as a croissant. Okay, let's pull it together here. Okay, the article is, let's see, where is this? theconfessionalspodcast.com. So it's another podcast that's posting this. Go over and check them out. If this is the kind of stuff they post, it's fantastic. You should check it. I haven't even listened to their podcast, but it's got to be great. It starts out with, the UK may have creepy potatoes that look like human toes. I'm sorry, but Poland has terrifying tree croissants. Okay, I got it. Oh, recently, Caracal's Society for the Protection of Animals received a call from a hysterical person who reported a sighting of a mysterious monster so disturbing that residents were afraid to open their windows lest it come in after them. Concern for both the community and the unidentified creature. The animal welfare group was dispatched to locate the beast, which was, in fact, a croissant. Though clearly confused by the unusual event, the group was able to subdue the threatening pastry without incident. The case of the Polish croissant cryptid reminds us that an event, that even if an unidentified entity turns out to be fake, the terror is still very real. Read up on the flanking encounter in the article below from the Coast to Coast AM. Oh, they have a picture Okay, folks, I gotta leave this one behind. I'm not gonna be able to hold it together for the next segment. Okay, so I will post this one on Facebook pages. I'm gonna take a break while I collect myself. Okay, I'm back and I'm in better shape now. Today, I wanted to go back to the beginning, and I know we've talked about it a couple of times in some of our earlier episodes about the Kenneth Arnold sighting, widely regarded as the first UFO sighting in modern history. That's going back to 1947. What I want to do is I want to revisit this, and I like to, when I'm doing my research, try to find the earliest recounting of an experience like the one Kenneth Arnold had, and then break it down and talk a little bit about it, and then think about what's the most reasonable explanation for this sighting, and do we keep on the list of possibilities crafts that are non-human flying in our airspace. I'm taking this from an article Kenneth Arnold wrote back in 1947, a little over a month after he had his observations. Let's go through his account of the sighting, and then let's talk about it a little bit. So I am taking this from Fate Presents UFOs and the ET Presence, compiled and edited by Rosemary Ellen Gulley. I Did See the Flying Disc by Kenneth Arnold. The following story of what I observed over the Cascade Mountains, as impossible as it may seem, is positively true. I never asked nor wanted any notoriety for just accidentally being in the right spot at the right time to observe what I did. I reported something that I know any pilot would have reported. I don't think in any way my observation was due to sensitivity of eyesight or judgment other than what is considered normal for any pilot. On Tuesday, June 24th, 1947, I had finished my work for the Central Air Service at Chehalis, Washington. At about 2 o'clock, I took off from Chehalis, Washington Airport with the intention of going to Yakima, Washington. My trip was delayed for an hour to search for a large marine transport that supposedly went down near or around the southwest side of Mount Rainier in the state of Washington. This airplane has been discovered at the time of this writing, July 29th, 1947. I flew directly toward Mount Rainier after reaching an altitude of 9,500 feet, which is the approximate elevation of the high plateau from which Mount Rainier rises. I had made one sweep from this high plateau to the westward, searching all the various ridges for this marine ship, and flew to the west down and near the ridge side of the canyon where Ashford, Washington is located. Unable to see anything that looked like the lost ship, I made a 360-degree turn to the right and above the little city of Mineral, started again toward Mount Rainier. I climbed back up to an altitude of approximately 9,200 feet. I trimmed out my airplane in the direction of Yakima, Washington, which was almost directly east of my position. The air was so smooth that day that it was a real pleasure flying, and, as most pilots do when the air is smooth, and when they're flying at a higher altitude, I simply sat in my plane, observing the sky and terrain. There was a DC-4 to the left, and to the rear of me, approximately 15 miles distance, I should judge at 14,000 feet elevation. So let's stop there and look to see what a DC-4 looks like. It's a cargo plane, I think. If Steve were here, he could tell us all kinds of things about it. Yeah, it's this. It is a big plane. It's an American 4-engine propeller-driven airliner developed by Douglas Aircraft Company. So he's not alone in the sky. There's also a DC-4 up there with him. It's to the left and to the rear of him, approximately 15 miles distance, and a little bit above him at 14,000 feet elevation. That's his guess. The sky and air were as clear as crystal. I had not flown more than 2 or 3 minutes on my course when a bright flash reflected on my airplane. It startled me as I thought I was too close to some other aircraft. I looked every place in the sky and couldn't find where the reflection had come from until I looked to the left and the north of Mount Rainier, where I observed a chain of 9 peculiar-looking aircraft flying from north to south at approximately 9,500 feet elevation and going seemingly in a definite direction of about 170 degrees north to south. They were approaching Mount Rainier very rapidly, and I merely assumed they were jets. Anyhow, I discovered that this was where the reflection had come from, as 2 or 3 of them every few seconds would dip or change their course slightly, just enough for the sun to strike them at an angle that reflected brightly in my eyes. These objects being quite far away, I was unable for a few seconds to make out their shape or their formation. Very shortly, they approached Mount Rainier, and I observed their outline against the snow quite plainly. I thought it was peculiar that I couldn't find their tails, but assumed they were some new type of jet. I was determined to clock their speed. I had two definite points, Mount Rainier and Mount Adams, to clock them by. And the air was so clear that it was very easy to see the objects and determine their approximate shape and size as far as 50 miles. I remember distinctly that my sweep second hand on my 8-day clock, which is located on my instrument panel, read 1 minute to 3 p.m. as the first object of this formation passed the southern edge of Mount Rainier. I watched these objects with great interest, and I had never before observed airplanes flying so close to the mountaintops, flying directly south to southeast down the hog's back of a mountain range. I would estimate their elevation could have varied 1,000 feet, one way or another, up or down, but they were pretty much on the horizon to me, which would indicate they were near the same elevation as I was. They flew, as I have frequently observed geese fly, in a rather diagonal chain-like line as if they were linked together. They seemed to hold a definite direction that swerved in and out of the high mountain peaks. Their speed at the time did not impress me particularly, because I knew that our Army and Air Forces had planes that went very fast. What kept bothering me as I watched them flip and flash in the sun right along the path was the fact that I couldn't make out any tail on them, and I am sure that any pilot would justify more than a second look at such a plane. I observed them quite plainly, and I estimate my distance from them, which was almost at right angles, to be between 20 and 25 miles. I knew they must be very large to permit me to observe their shape at that distance, even as clear a day as it was. In fact, I compared a Zeus fastener or cowling tool I had in my pocket with them, holding it up on them and holding it up on the DC-4 that I could observe at quite a distance to my left. They seemed smaller than the DC-4, but I should judge their span would have been wide as the farthest engines on each side of the fuselage of the DC-4. The more I observed these objects, the more upset I became, as I am accustomed to and familiar with almost all flying objects, whether I am close to the ground or at higher altitudes. I observed the chain of these objects passing another high snow-covered ridge between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams, and as the first one was passing the south crest of this ridge, the last object was entering the northern crest of the ridge. As I was flying in the direction of this particular ridge, I measured it and found it to be approximately 5 miles, so I could safely assume that the chain of these saucer-like objects was at least 5 miles long. I could quite accurately determine their pathway due to the fact that there were several of them, as well as higher peaks on the other side of their pathway. As the last unit of this formation passed the northernmost high snow-covered crest of Mount Adams, I looked at my sweep second hand, and it showed that they had traveled the distance of 1 minute and 42 seconds. Even at this timing did not upset me, as I felt confident that after I landed, there would be some explanation for what I had seen. A number of newsmen and experts suggested that I might have been seeing reflections or even a mirage. This I know to be absolutely false, as I observed these objects not only through the glass of my airplane, but turned my airplane sideways where I could open my window and observe them with a completely unobstructed view. Even though 2 minutes seems like a very short time to one on the ground, in the air, in 2 minutes' time, a pilot can observe a great many things, and anything within his field of vision probably as many as 50 or 60 times. I continued my search for the marine plane for another 15 or 20 minutes, and while searching for this marine plane, the things I had just observed kept going through my mind. I became more disturbed, so after taking the last look at the Teton Reservoir, I headed for Yakima. I might add that my complete observation of these objects, which I could even follow by their flashes as they passed Mount Adams, was around 2 1/2 or 3 minutes. Although by the time they reached Mount Adams, they were out of my range of vision as far as determining shape or form. Of course, when the sun reflected from 1 or 2 or 3 of these units, they appeared to be completely round. But I am making a drawing to the best of my ability, which I am including as to the shape I observed these objects to be as they passed the snow-covered ridges of Mount Rainier. When these objects were flying approximately straight and level, they were just a thin black line, and the only time I could get a judgment as to their size was when they flipped. These objects were holding an almost constant elevation. They did not seem to be going up or to be coming down, such as would be the case of rockets or artillery shells. I am convinced in my own mind that they were some type of airplane, even though they did not conform with the many aspects of the conventional type of planes that I know. Although these objects have been reported by many other observers throughout the United States, there have been 6 or 7 other accounts written by some of the observers that I can truthfully say must have observed the same thing I did, particularly the descriptions of the 3 Western airline employees of Cedar City, Utah. The pilot from Oklahoma City, a United Press correspondent of Boise, Idaho, Dave Johnson, news editor at the Boise Daily Statesman, Captain Smith, a co-pilot, Stevens and Marty Morrow of United Airlines, and Captain Charles F. Gabane and Jack Harvey of the United Airlines, both of whom on July 28, 1947 made their observation on the United Airlines Flight 105 westbound out of Boise. It is my opinion that descriptions could not be very accurate taken from the ground unless these saucer-like discs were at quite a great height. And there is a possibility that all of the people who observed peculiar objects could have seen the same thing I did. It would have been very difficult from the ground to observe these for more than 4 or 5 seconds. And there is always a possibility of atmospheric moisture and dust near the ground which would distort one's vision, while air observers I would judge to be much more accurate. I have in my possession letters from all over the United States and Europe from people who profess that these objects have been observed over other portions of the world, principally Sweden, Bermuda, and California. I would have given almost anything that day to have had a movie camera with a telephoto lens, and from now on, I will never be without one. When I landed at Yakima, Washington Airport, I described what I'd seen to a very good friend, Al Baxter, who was the general manager of Central Aircraft Company. He listened patiently and was very courteous, but in a joking way, didn't believe me. I did not accurately measure the distance between these 2 mountains until I landed at Pendleton, Oregon the same day. I told a number of pilot friends what I had observed, and they did not scoff or laugh, but suggested they might be guided missiles or something new. In fact, several former Army pilots informed me that they had been briefed before going into combat overseas that they might see objects of similar shape and design that I had described, and assured me that I wasn't dreaming or going crazy. I quote Sonny Robinson, a former Army Air Force pilot who is now operating dusting operations at Pendleton, Oregon. What you observed, I am convinced, is some type of jet or rocket-propelled ship that is in the process of being tested by our government, or it could even be by some foreign government. Anyhow, the news that I had observed these spread very rapidly, and before the night was over, I was receiving telephone calls from all parts of the world, and to date, I have not received one telephone call or one letter of scoffing or disbelief. The only disbelief that I know of was what was printed in the papers. I look at the whole affair not as something funny, as some people have made it out to be. To me, it is mighty serious, and since I evidently did observe something that at least Mr. John Doe on the street corner or Pete Andrews on the ranch has never heard about, is no reason that it does not exist. Even though I openly invited an investigation by the Army and FBI as to the authenticity of my story, or a mental and physical examination as to my capabilities, I received no interest from these 2 important protective forces of our country until 2 weeks after my observation. I will go so far as to assume that if our military intelligence was not aware of what I observed and reported to the United Press International and Associated Press, and over the radio on 2 different occasions, which apparently set the nation buzzing, they would be the very first people I would expect as visitors. I have received lots of requests from people who told me to make a lot of wild guesses. I have based what I've written here in this article on positive facts, and as far as guessing what it was I observed, it is just as much a mystery to me as it is to the rest of the world. I saw them, and I know they are real. My pilot's license is 33489. I fly a Call Air airplane, which is the 3-place single-engine land ship that is designed and manufactured at Afton, Wyoming, as an extremely high-performance, high-altitude airplane that was made for mountain work. The national certificate of my plane is NC 33355. So let's go over a few details of the encounter before we talk about possible explanations for what Kenneth Arnold saw. First, let's talk about the computed speed of the craft, which Kenneth estimated to be about 1,700 miles per hour. He adjusted this down when talking in interviews to 1,200 miles an hour to provide a conservative estimate, accounting for any errors in his calculation. Chuck Yeager would be the first man to successfully break the sound barrier in a controlled test flight, which requires a speed exceeding 767 miles an hour. This didn't happen until October of 1947. The objects Kenneth Arnold observed were traveling 1.5 to twice the speed of the sound barrier. Let's move on to the size of the objects. Now, to estimate the size, Kenneth used a DeZeuss cowling fastener. A cowl is the cover of an engine of an airplane. so the fastener that he used is simply a specialized twist-on bolt used to hold the cowl in place. He did this first by estimating the distance of an object he was familiar with. That was the DC-4 he was sharing the sky with that day. And then, holding the fastener up to the DC-4, he could establish scale with that Zeus fastener. He repeated the process with the unidentified objects. This allowed him to give a rough estimate of those size, which he placed at about 60 feet long. The United Airlines crew had a similar sighting 10 days later and estimated the craft to be just over 100 feet length, or slightly larger than the DC-4. Army Air Force analysts would later estimate the size of the craft to be between 140 and 208 feet, based on various witness testimony. There were other witnesses both to the same sighting made by Kenneth Arnold and witnesses who had their own sightings in the following months. Kenneth expressed regret that he didn't have a camera with a telephoto lens to capture the event and that he intended to buy one and keep it with him on future flights. The phrase flying saucer was likely misapplied from the description Arnold gave when describing the motion of the objects and not the shape. Arnold described the shape of the objects as bat-shaped and flat like a pie pan. He also provided drawings of the objects, which can be found online. Head on over to our website if you'd like to see some of these drawings. Arnold's sighting, along with that of the United Airlines crew, were included on a list of best sightings in the intelligence report compiled by the Army, Air Force, and FBI, which led to the Twining Memo, acknowledging the reality of UFOs and kicking off Project Sign, which would eventually become Project Blue Book. So with all of those details in mind, let's jump on into the skeptic side and try to explain what Kenneth saw that day. Some of the sightings other witnesses reported were undoubtedly the new P-80 jet aircraft. One such sighting on July the 4th over Portland, Oregon, occurred at the same time that 24 P-80 aircraft were in the air when that sighting took place. The closest P-80s for Arnold sightings, however, were 600 air miles from Kenneth's location, which would have been a little over an hour away flight time. Mirages have been suggested, but I think mostly ruled out given that there were other witnesses at different locations throughout the day. Birds have been suggested, specifically pelicans. Now, where do I start with this one? There are no birds we are aware of that fly 1,200 miles an hour, reflect sunlight 20 miles away, and are 100 feet long. I suppose if a mad scientist of the day strapped on a jetpack on a pelican, dressed it up in a sequin dress, it might fit the bill. Fit the bill. All right, moving on. I think the bird one's ridiculous. So there are a bunch of other explanations that skeptics have provided us over the years. Meteors, clouds, snow blowing off the mountain, or spots of water on the airplane's windows. I keep a waste bin by my desk for lame attempts like those. I mean, did they even read the account? Come on. You guys give skepticism a bad name. Well, I still think it's plausible that a prosaic explanation of the Kenneth Arnold sighting is possible. I also think an out-of-world one is as well. If this were a one-off event, I don't think we would be sitting here talking about it. However, sightings of unknown objects in the sky have been going on throughout human history, and with each passing year, more and more eyes are looking up, more and more cameras and other electronic means of observation are turning skyward, and it's only a matter of time before this mystery is solved, once and for all. I myself am hoping for benevolent insect overlords. That's our show for this week. Tune in next week, where, if Stephen makes it back in time, we will be covering Thunderbirds. Now that I think about it, if we can prove Thunderbirds exist, we might put birds back on the list of explanations for this sighting, and others like it. That being said, I'm Jimmy Coe, advising you to keep your eyes to the skies and your feet on the ground. I'll catch up with you next week. That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you'd like to share, you can contact us using our email account, firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.